On a prestigious first-class flight, an arrogant and prejudiced flight attendant unknowingly insulted a modest passenger, only to later realize that this passenger was none other than Melania Trump, the powerful and world-renowned former First Lady of the United States. What followed was the unraveling of a professional's career as she faced the consequences of the gravest mistake of her life. Are you intrigued by this story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking narratives. It was a crisp afternoon at JFK Airport when Melania Trump walked through the terminal, her elegance unmistakable even without the limelight that usually accompanied her. The flashy advertisements and bustling crowd seemed insignificant compared to the quiet poise she carried with every step. After a week filled with high-profile social events and intense political discussions, Melania chose to take a commercial flight, a decision that wasn't rooted in the need to save money, but rather a desire to experience a sense of normalcy, away from the constant scrutiny that came with her public life. On that day, she opted for a simple yet sophisticated outfit, a cream-colored turtleneck sweater, dark-tailored pants, and oversized sunglasses that concealed nearly half her face. She carried a small black handbag, completing the look with minimal makeup, just a light foundation and natural lipstick. This understated appearance was a stark contrast to the glamour that the world typically associated with her name. As she passed through the security checkpoint, not a single staff member recognized the famous former First Lady. They noticed her composed demeanor and quiet elegance, but there was no recognition. She was just another traveler, anonymous and at ease in her solitude. This anonymity brought Melania a rare moment of peace. There were no forced smiles, no selfies to pose for. This flight, in that moment, was hers and hers alone. When Melania entered the first-class cabin, her presence was almost ethereal. She moved gracefully, with quiet steps, settling into a window seat, the sunlight from the nearby window gently highlighting her features. She removed her sunglasses and gazed out at the runway, savoring a rare moment of calm amidst the hustle and bustle of her busy life. Meanwhile, Sarah Montgomery, the head flight attendant, was meticulously scanning the passenger list. Sarah had spent over 15 years in the industry, perfecting the art of delivering impeccable service in the first-class cabin. With her perfectly styled brown hair and flawless uniform, Sarah exuded professionalism. She prided herself on her ability to maintain order and ensure that the first-class experience was nothing short of perfect. As Sarah moved her eyes down the list of names and then glanced over the passengers already seated, one woman caught her attention, the woman in the second row by the window. Melania's modest attire didn't align with the image Sarah had in mind for typical first-class travelers. First-class passengers, in Sarah's experience, often flaunted their designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and ostentatious displays of wealth. But this woman was different. No designer bags, no luxurious watch, no sparkling diamonds. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, yet there was something about her that didn't fit the usual mold. Curious and a little uneasy, Sarah approached Melania, her polished smile hiding a faint hint of suspicion. As she stood before her, she kept her tone professional, though there was an undeniable firmness. "Excuse me, ma'am," Sarah said. "I need to check your ticket again." Melania, unfazed, calmly reached into her small black handbag and handed over her ticket, maintaining her serene composure. Sarah briefly glanced at the ticket, first class, matching the seat number perfectly. There was no apparent mistake. Yet, despite the perfect documentation, something about the entire situation left Sarah unsettled. "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah said, handing the ticket back, though she lingered for a moment longer, scanning Melania from head to toe. Her outfit, her demeanor, it didn't match the profile of the typical first-class passenger. But Melania, with her gentle smile and composed silence, didn't flinch. There was no defensiveness, no irritation. The former First Lady's quiet confidence left Sarah feeling disarmed, but her instincts were sharp, and doubt had already begun to creep in. Later, in the crew area, Sarah placed the passenger list down and folded her arms across her chest. Emily, a younger flight attendant with only a few years of experience, noticed the look of concern on Sarah's face and asked, "Is everything okay? You look a bit worried." Sarah, trying to shake off the unease, shrugged. The woman in the second row. She doesn't look like a first-class passenger. No designer bags, no jewelry, no flash. I'm just not sure who she is. Emily frowned slightly but offered a simple reply. But her ticket is valid, right? It is, Sarah admitted, though there was an edge of doubt in her voice. But appearances can be deceiving. Experience teaches you that not everyone is who they claim to be. I just want to be sure. Emily tilted her head slightly, her youthful optimism shining through. Maybe she just wants to be comfortable. Not everyone feels the need to show off. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Her sharp gaze drifted back to the first-class cabin, her thoughts still swirling. She wasn't judging Melania. She didn't even know who she was. But something about the woman's understated appearance seemed off, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Back in the first-class cabin, Melania sat quietly, engrossed in a fashion magazine. The sunlight still bathed her face in a soft glow. Sarah stood in the aisle, staring at the woman, caught between curiosity and caution. There was a nagging feeling, a suspicion that refused to dissipate, and Sarah couldn't shake the sensation that she was overlooking something critical. But what was it? It wasn't just about the woman. It was about doing her job flawlessly. Every detail of the flight had to be perfect, every passenger deserving of the first-class experience. Sarah knew she couldn't let anything slip past her. A memory surfaced in Sarah's mind, a past incident when a man had posed as a VIP passenger and snuck into the first-class cabin using a counterfeit ticket. It had been a nightmare for the entire crew. Sarah knew that sometimes people could deceive you with charm and appearance. She wasn't about to let that happen again. Determined, Sarah turned to Emily. I think I need to double-check. We can't afford any mistakes. Emily, slightly taken aback, asked, You think she's suspicious? But her ticket checked out. Yes, it did, Sarah said firmly. But that doesn't mean it's foolproof. Just because something seems legitimate doesn't mean it's safe. I've seen too many cases where appearances misled us. I can't let that happen today. Emily, though still a little unsure, knew better than to argue with Sarah's instincts. The veteran flight attendant had a reputation for perfectionism, and she didn't take risks when it came to ensuring the highest standards of service. The silence in the first-class cabin felt almost suffocating, like a taut wire pulled to its breaking point. Sarah Montgomery, the head flight attendant with over 15 years of experience, couldn't shake the suspicion gnawing at her. The unease was too strong to ignore. She wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. Determined to resolve her doubts, Sarah stepped out of the service area, her eyes once again fixed on the woman in the second row, the woman who had drawn her attention from the start. Melania Trump remained seated, her eyes absorbed in the pages of a fashion magazine, seemingly unbothered by Sarah's scrutiny. Yet that very composure, that calmness without so much as a hint of restlessness, made Sarah's discomfort grow. It was unnatural. If this woman didn't belong here, then why was she acting so serenely? Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. The time for hesitation was over. If she was going to get to the bottom of this, it had to be now. With renewed confidence in her abilities, she walked back to the first-class cabin, every step purposeful, every thought calculated. This was not just about responsibility anymore. It was an insistent need to uncover the truth, no matter how complicated, no matter how far it might take her. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken as Sarah walked down the aisle, her gaze not lingering on any other passenger, except Melania. The woman remained immersed in her magazine, her tranquil demeanor unshaken by Sarah's presence. There was no fidgeting, no acknowledgement, as if the flight attendant didn't exist at all. Sarah came to a stop beside her, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice steady but carrying a firm edge. "I need to verify your identity for the sake of flight security." For the first time, Melania looked up slowly, her piercing blue eyes locking onto Sarah's with such intensity that Sarah instinctively stepped back. It was as if she were facing someone with great power, but the simple, understated appearance of the woman before her made it impossible for Sarah to recognize her. Melania removed her oversized sunglasses and set them down delicately on the seat next to her. With a subtle tilt of her head, she spoke in a warm but resolute tone. "I believe the ticket should suffice for verification. I am simply looking for a quiet flight." The calmness of Melania's response made Sarah hesitate. The woman's serenity was unnerving, especially in the face of a direct inquiry. There was no fear, no tension, only an air of someone used to being in control. No one in first class, especially not someone questioned by a flight attendant, maintained such comps. There was no fear, no tension, only an air of someone used to being in control. No one in first class, especially not someone questioned by a flight attendant, maintained such composure. It was unnatural, and it made Sarah more determined than ever to push further. With a quiet sigh, Sarah lowered her voice but sharpened it with a steely resolve. "Ma'am, I understand that you have a valid first-class ticket, but this is a premium flight, and it's our responsibility to ensure the absolute safety and security of all passengers. If you cannot provide further information to verify your identity, I will have no choice but to ask you to leave the first-class cabin." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. The tension between the two women thickened. A few passengers nearby glanced up, sensing the friction between Sarah and the woman in the second row. Whispers began to circulate as they speculated about what was happening. Melania didn't flinch. She remained seated, her gaze steady, unshaken. Slowly, she placed her magazine down onto her lap, her hands folding elegantly before her. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the air like a blade. "I don't believe I need to prove anything further. You are disturbing me, and in turn you're disturbing the other passengers. Perhaps you should return to your duties." The impact of her words was immediate. For the first time in her career, Sarah felt her authority slip through her fingers. She had crossed a line, and the judgment in Melania's voice made it impossible to deny. The eyes of the other passengers felt like daggers, all turning toward her, now watching the unfolding exchange with growing interest. Sarah had a sinking feeling that she was no longer the one in control. She quickly dismissed the thought and stepped closer, her posture stiffening as she clung to what little authority she had left. "Ma'am," she said, her voice now strained with the weight of the situation, "I must emphasize that this is not harassment. It is my responsibility. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to escort you out of first class." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Passengers around them leaned forward, their curiosity mounting. A middle-aged woman behind Melania whispered to her husband, "What's going on? Who is she? Why is the flight attendant being so insistent?" The man frowned and shook his head. "I'm not sure, but she looks familiar." Melania, however, remained completely still, her gaze unwavering. She stood up with fluid grace, every inch the poised and elegant figure, yet the subtle tension in her posture conveyed a clear message. She would not tolerate any further mistreatment. "I am willing to leave if you truly believe I don't belong here," Melania said, her voice measured and deliberate. "But remember, not everyone needs to prove their worth just because they don't fit into your narrow expectations." Her words struck Sarah like a punch to the gut. The challenge, the quiet power in Melania's tone, froze her in place. For a moment, Sarah was speechless. Then, just as she opened her mouth to respond, a voice cut through the tension from behind, shattering the heavy atmosphere. "Wait, don't you recognize her?" a man's voice called out. Sarah turned, startled, and locked eyes with a middle-aged man who had risen from his seat in the back row. The words that followed left Sarah, and everyone else in the first-class cabin, completely stunned. The man stepped forward, his voice now rising with clarity and recognition. "That's Melania Trump, former First Lady of the United States." The cabin went silent. Passengers exchanged glances, their disbelief palpable. Some leaned forward to get a better look, while others muttered in hushed tones. Melania, for the first time, allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch her lips. Though she said nothing, Sarah stood there, her face pale with realization. The woman she had been so insistent on questioning, the woman she had doubted and scrutinized, was someone far beyond her own expectations, or anyone else's. The weight of the moment crashed down on Sarah. She had misjudged her, and the repercussions of that misstep were now painfully clear. The realization hit Sarah like a freight train, and the implications of her actions reverberated throughout the cabin. The perfect world she had worked so hard to maintain, the professionalism that had been her shield, all unraveled in a single moment. Sarah's career, her reputation, and her very understanding of herself as a flight attendant were forever changed by her encounter with Melania Trump. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder and more animated as the situation unfolded. An elderly man in a sharply tailored suit discreetly pulled out his phone, his fingers flying over the screen. After a moment of searching, he leaned toward the young woman sitting next to him, his voice a quiet murmur of disbelief. "I think I know who she is," he said, his eyes wide. "Who?" the woman asked. He showed her a picture on his phone. "It's her, First Lady Melania Trump." The cabin's quiet shattered as passengers began recognizing her, pulling out their phones. "Really? Melania Trump? How could the flight attendant not recognize her?" Sarah, feeling the growing scrutiny, realized her mistake. A voice behind her said, "Don't you recognize her?" "That's Melania Trump." Sarah turned, her heart sinking as the woman she'd dismissed was revealed. Melania's gaze was intense but silent, reproachful without a word. "I'm sorry if I caused you trouble," Sarah muttered, ashamed. Passengers whispered, how could she not recognize her? She had a valid ticket. Melania stood calmly, her voice steady. "It shouldn't matter who I am. It's how you treat a passenger." Her words left Sarah speechless. Melania added, "You judged me by appearances, making everyone uncomfortable." A passenger agreed. "She's right. First class doesn't mean we treat others like they don't belong." Shamed, Sarah lowered her head, realizing her mistake. Melania, returning to her seat, spoke with quiet authority. "I hope this helps you reconsider how you perceive and treat others. Respect shouldn't be based on identity. It's something everyone deserves." Her words cut through the cabin's tension, urging reflection from everyone present. Sarah stood frozen, her inner storm at odds with the calm she tried to maintain. Melania's gaze held an intensity that felt like a painful truth. "I don't need to prove who I am to be treated with respect," Melania continued, "but your actions today made me wonder how many others have suffered judgment without a chance to speak." The silence in the cabin was heavy, passengers reflecting on their own biases. Sarah trembled, realizing her wrongs, not just toward Melania, but to herself and those she served. Her excuses were swallowed by the weight of Melania's words. "You don't need to apologize to me," Melania said gently. "Reflect on how you do your job and treat others. This is about the world we want to build." Sarah stood silent, deeply moved. A middle-aged man spoke up. "We judge too quickly based on appearances. Respect isn't just for a select few." Another woman added, "I thought she didn't belong here either, but I see now I was wrong. Thank you for the lesson, Melania." Melania nodded, her quiet dignity speaking volumes. Sarah, now deeply remorseful, apologized. "I let my bias overshadow my responsibilities. Thank you for reminding me of what truly matters, respect, without conditions." Melania's soft nod acknowledged the apology, and though this wasn't the end for Sarah, it marked the beginning of her growth. As she retreated, the cabin felt different, transformed by a powerful, unspoken lesson. "This is a distinguished guest. Please ensure she receives the highest level of service throughout the flight." The command was clear, firm, and unmistakable. As the words sank into Sarah's ears, she felt a wave of heat rise to her face. Her pride was bruised as her heart pounded in her chest. She had always prided herself on maintaining the utmost professionalism. To be corrected in such a way felt like an attack on her character. I deeply apologize, Captain," Sarah stammered, her voice faltering as the color in her cheeks intensified. "I didn't realize—" Captain Hayes raised a hand, cutting her off with a curt and measured tone. "Whether you realized it or not is irrelevant, Sarah," he said, his voice calm but stern. "What matters is how we treat our passengers. We are here to serve, not to judge." His words hit Sarah with the force of a slap, leaving her speechless. A sharp pang of humiliation coursed through her veins, but she knew better than to respond. There was no room for argument, no defense she could offer. She lowered her gaze, trying to steady herself under the weight of the passengers' expectant stares. Meanwhile, Melania Trump, calm, composed, and effortlessly dignified, offered the captain a soft, reassuring smile. Her voice, though gentle, carried an undertone of confidence and understanding. "Thank you, Captain Hayes," she said smoothly. "I believe this was just a small misunderstanding." Her words, though mild, carried immense weight. They were a perfect example of grace under pressure, of a calm demeanor in the face of potential conflict. As she spoke, a quiet admiration filled the air around her. Even those who had witnessed Sarah's error now regarded Melania with newfound respect. Captain Hayes nodded in return, his gaze softening as he looked at Melania. "We greatly appreciate your understanding, Mrs. Trump. Should you need anything else, please don't hesitate to let us know." With a respectful bow, he turned and walked back toward the cockpit, casting one last deliberate glance at Sarah as he passed. Sarah felt the weight of the moment as the tension in the cabin shifted. While passengers resumed their routines, a subtle admiration for Melania lingered. Sarah, however, struggled with guilt over her own prejudice. She realized that her assumptions had clouded her judgment and led to a professional failure. Melania, unfazed, calmly returned to her seat while Sarah wrestled with her internal conflict. As the flight continued, Sarah recognized the lesson she had learned about true professionalism: respect, dignity, and humanity. Emily noticed Sarah's distress and reassured her, reminding her that acknowledging mistakes was the first step to growth. Meanwhile, the passengers in first class marveled at Melania's grace, discussing the valuable lesson she had taught. Back in the galley, Sarah resolved to improve. She apologized to Melania, admitting her error and vowing to learn from it. Melania's calm response offered understanding, not judgment. The incident sparked a broader conversation online, urging people to reflect on their biases. Sarah embraced the criticism, seeking further training, and dedicated herself to treating others with respect. This experience reshaped both her and Melania's public image, emphasizing the importance of respect in every interaction.